chapter 11, part 5. I'm going to start back at that. Rostand, who was born in Marseille, had all the fire and panache of the south, coupled with the elegance of a grand seigneur. 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 Handsome, rapier slim, he was an impeccably tailored romantic, as well-groomed as his plays. Sasha Guitry said that his youthful success, his delicate face, his charming voice made him as seductive as possible. And after he, with the glorious cooperation of Coqueline, immortalized Cyrano de Bergerac, he became the popular playwright of his day. He had the right receipt for stirring his audience or reducing them to tears at just the right time, and, his plays being written in graceful verse, were given more credit by the sophisticated elite than they may have deserved. Arthur Symons, who was not so enthusiastic, said that Rostand appealed to the public as a millionaire appeals to society. His morning mail brought letters from budding poets begging advice, elderly countesses asking him to tea, and dewy-eyed literary ladies protesting undying devotion, which letters he seldom answered. He was bombarded with social invitations, most of which he turned down. He was no misanthrope, but abhorred wasting time with people who meant nothing to him. For all the adulation, he remained retiringly modest, preferring the companionship of his family and a few intimate friends. There are the inevitable speculation as to whether or not Rostand was at one time Bernhardt's lover. Any such supposition strikes me as nonsensical, not because of the discrepancy in age. An inconsequential thing like that would never have bothered her, but because she considered him her special protege, her attitude being almost motherly. She was passionately possessive about him, always referring to him as mon poète. And Rostand was touchingly dependent upon her. To him she was a brightly protecting angel, and he hung from one of her rays. He found her necessary to his life as the earth finds the sun. Sarah was devoted to his wife and children, regarding them as part of her family. Few days passed when they failed to exchange visits. 2 years after La Princesse Lontaine came another Rostand offering by Madame Sarah's poet, the Samaritan, an uplift verse drama based on the meeting of Christ with the woman of Samaria, for which audiences felt obliged to profess admiration, although it sounds like a crashing bore. It must certainly have been quite suitable for those sheltered young daughters. However, Rostand himself didn't allow his young son to see it, due to the fact that the woman of Samaria had, before her conversion, been a woman of sin. Although illogically enough, he took him to see La Dame aux Camélias. Then, in 1900, L'Agnon burst upon the theatrical world. It was a long time a-bursting, for rehearsals lasted 6 months with time out for Sarah and Rostand to make a trip to Vienna for the purpose of studying Schönbrunn Castle and the haunts of Napoleon's luckless son. All during this period, Sarah continued to direct and act in her regular repertory. Sasha, who knew much about the preparations for L'Aiglon, as his magnificent father was the original Flambeau, has left an account of those rehearsals. The cast, he wrote, would be called for 1 p.m., and the minor players and extras would show up more or less on time. Lucien Guitry would stride in about 2:30, and Rostand usually arrived at 3. At 3:45, Madame Sarah made her entrance, and the whole company came up to kiss her hand. As there were some 50 persons to perform this ceremony one by one, this took a bit of time. Further delay came when Madame Sarah changed her clothes, for in order to feel unhampered by her trailing skirts and scarves and free to make the moves and gestures of a 20-year-old youth, she always rehearsed in her Lorenzaccio costume. At 5, work was suspended for Madame Sarah's cup of tea, during which formality everyone sat watching her with patience and tender respect. It is extraordinary that the play ever got readied for the opening. Everyone knows that L'Aiglon deals with Napoleon's delicate son, the Duc de Reichstadt, wasting away from ill health and neglect in the confines of Schönbrunn, unloved by his silly mother Marie-Louise, tyrannized by the wily Chancellor of Austria Metternich, obsessed by the legend of his father and pathetic dreams of re-establishing the Bonaparte Empire with himself, the rightful heir, at its head to lead the Grande Armée, onto a repetition of the old glories. A 6-act verse drama, it is filled with tender scenes of pathos and sentiment, plus the sort of patriotic speeches that reduce a French audience to tears and shouts of "Bravo!" Sacha Guitry tells of the rehearsal of one particularly stirring moment in the act set on the plain of Wagram, in which the eaglet, who in company with the faithful Flambeau, one of Napoleon's old grognards, is about to embark upon the valiant but hopeless venture of returning to France, cries out, "I grab the Maine, le Jacques d'Est." Sarah stopped the proceedings to ask Rostand the meaning of the line. The poet started to translate the Latin, and she interrupted, saying, "I know that means the die is cast, but what's this mane I'm grabbing?" "The mane of the horse," Rostand replied. "What horse?" she demanded. "The horse you were about to mount." "I'm going to mount a horse." It had been some 20 years since her days of riding side saddle in the Bois or Hyde Park, and the prospect of leaping tight-trousered astride a live steed appalled her. She ordered the stage manager to send out for the tamest horse in Paris. A seemingly gentle animal was procured, and they started the scene. But in a moment of irritation or possible boredom, it stamped its hoof, and Sarah pronounced it wicked and not to be trusted. Next day a man led onto stage a slow-lumbering nag whose head was completely swathed in what proved to be a pair of woolen underdrawers. As he unwound the curious covering, the owner extolled the virtues of this horse who, he said, was afraid of nothing, yet had the virtue of a lamb, a dove, and an early Christian martyr. Sarah, who was skeptical, insisted that the creature be put to a test, ran straight up to it and screamed, "Boo!" The horse looked mildly astonished, then sighed, hung its head, and went into a contented sleep. She then called for someone to sound the thunder machine. A stagehand, using a large hammer, struck a deafening blow on the metal sheet. The horse slept on, looking patiently dejected. Still not reassured, Sarah ordered every person present to form a large circle, then at a given signal make a giant rush upon it, shouting in unison, "Vive l'Empereur!" This had the effect of waking the horse, whose sole reaction was to emit a loud trumpeting noise which did not issue from its throat. All of them, including the star, went into immediate paroxysms. Lucien Guitry suggested that the beast was a Republican expressing its opinion of empire. Sarah declared that it was a common pig, but that as it appeared to have no nervous system, she'd hire it. Rostand came out with the information that there would have to be an additional horse for Guitry, an announcement which had a depressing effect on the actor. At this, the owner started winding the woolen underdrawers about his equine's patient head, saying sadly that in that case they would have to get 2 other animals. When asked why, he explained, "You see, my fine horse is afraid of only one thing in this world. He's afraid of other horses. So I must lead him through the streets blindfolded. If another horse gets near him, he goes completely to pieces." The outcome of this was that the scene was eventually played minus any quadrupeds. Bernhardt cried out her line about grabbing the mane in a ringing voice, her arms and eyes raised on high as though she were expecting some Pegasus to charge down from the heavens. And before any such unlikely occurrence took place, the curtain fell to thundering applause. L'Aiglon always played to thundering applause. The opening night was March 17th, 1900, and Tau Paris attended. Celebrities from the theater, literary, and high society worlds. Particularly prominent was Prince Murat and further personages of the Bonapartist aristocracy. Between acts, Sarah sent a wire to Prince Victor Napoleon in Belgium saying, "Tonight, I am up to my waist in empire." The success of that night seemed like any other victory of Wagram. From then on, the slim figure of the young Duc de Reichstadt, the White Hamlet, as some called it, in the right-fitting uniform of pure white, relieved by colorful medals and black stock, topped by the delicate head with its unruly gold mop of hair, established itself in an almost universal image of Sarah Bernhardt, and there's no doubt that she was superb in the role. At one moment she was a lively little boy, as in the scene when she jumped onto the knees of her grandfather Franz Joseph, or when she discovered that the uniforms of her wooden soldiers had been secretly repainted by Flambeau, changing the colors of the Austrian army into those of the French. Her reaction was the joyous incredulity of a child discovering a Christmas tree. At other times she was a youthful hero, the embodiment of the imperial epic, as, standing on the deserted battlefields of Wagram, she cried out, "Paris, I already hear your bells." And further, smiling, the boy fell dead, apostrophizings. And of her death in the final act it was said that she drew a last breath, dying as angels would die if they were allowed to. The play ran nearly a year. That summer it served as a big showpiece during the 1900 exposition, and Sir Bernhardt and Edmond Rostand were the most talked about personages of Paris. Rostand, however, was not in town to bask in his glory. Never a physically robust man, he had contracted pneumonia the night of the opening and spent the spring convalescing in Montmorency with his family. Every day, Madame Sarah would drive out in her two-horse landau, swathed even in hot weather in that much-photographed chinchilla wrap which James Agate said recalled to him the breasts of snowbirds to pay her poet a visit, always bringing him a bunch of Napoleon violets. The devotion of Rostand and Bernhardt continued until the poet's premature death from Spanish influenza in 1918. The day he was made a member of the Academy, Sarah, in the company of Maurice and Rostand's son, another Maurice, sat in the visitors' gallery. For the three, it was a day of considerable emotion. Sarah cried, both Maurices cried, and they all had a lovely time. L'Aiglon did not create the furor in London as it had in Paris. After all, the British hardly shared with the French their sentimental veneration of Napoleon. To them, the once menacing Boney was less a hero was less a hero than a successfully defeated foe. Through the lengthy speeches filled with historical allusions, they squirmed visibly. Even Sarah's good friend Graham Robertson had to admit that it was an overlong prodigy of virtuosity, crashing with beauty and a little boredom, a play at which people will yawn and admire. It's like standing before a beautiful waterfall. Pretty soon one wants to leave. Max Beerbohm, who headed his review, Tame Eaglet, Tame Play. Or Tame Eaglet, Tame Play, found the evening interminable, lasting as it did from 8 until midnight. Also, the 56-year-old Sarah Bernhardt's impersonation of the 20-year-old Duc de Reichstadt left him unimpressed, as he wrote, "The trouble is not that Madame Bernhardt looks too old. On the contrary, her youthfulness is astounding. Nor is the trouble merely that the students of history she does not look like any known miniature of the Duc de Reichstadt, and does look like every known photograph of Miss Nellie Farren as little Jack Sheppard. The trouble is that to everyone she looks like a woman, walks like one, is one. In spite of these few adverse notices, L'Aiglon was the hit of the London season. Crowds gathered outside the stage door, some of them semi-hysterical. One worshipping girl fell in love with Bernhardt, or rather with the Duc de Reichstadt. She attended every matinee, sent a daily bouquet along with a poem of her own composition to the theater, and systematically turned down each suitor. And she had several, for she was a very attractive young woman. Her parents, in deep concern, wrote to the actress, who immediately sent for the girl. She received her in her dressing room, wearing an old and somewhat spotted wrapper, and minus a trace of makeup. "Take a good look, mon cher," she said. "This is really me. There is no such person as L'Aiglon except on the stage." The girl fled in disillusionment. A month later she married, and a year later Madame Sarah was godmother to their first child. L'Aiglon was equally successful in the United States. This was her 6th American tour. She was to make 9 in all. For this jaunt she brought with her 50 trunks, 5 servants, a secretary, and Regina's masseur. She also brought along Coqueline, as it was a co-starring season for her and her dear cook. France's greatest tragedian and France's greatest comedian, each was generous about taking a lesser role when the starring one was the other's pièce de résistance. In L'Aiglon, Coqueline gladly played Flambeau, a character who appears in neither the first nor the last act, and she in turn played the insipid role of Roxane, so that he could electrify the American audiences with his Cyrano de Bergerac. In Molière's Précieuses Ridicules, she again semi-obliterated herself as Elmire. And this required nerve on her part, for comedy was never her forte. But when questioned why she did it, she'd laugh and shrug it off by asking who would ever look at anyone else on the stage while Coque was on as Mascarille. As though to make a gallantly reciprocal gesture, Coqueline contented himself playing the first gravedigger in Hamlet. In Tosca, they shone in equally fine roles, although some claim that Guitry's Scarpia had been better. Sarah adored Coqueline, who was both a great artist and fundamentally simple, good man. Off stage, wearing his quaint spectacles, he looked like a village notary. Commenting on his comical nose, she claimed that it was ever sniffing up the joy of life. Theirs was a warm and happy camaraderie. Whenever they played a performance of Tosca, the moment places were called for the third act with its murderous supper scene, she'd spring up with alacrity and call out, "Allons, der Koch!" And often in the letter scene of La Dame, when Coqueline, as the elder Duval, had given a particularly fine performance, sitting at the desk as the heartbroken and lachrymose Marguerite, she'd write in the page before her, "Splendid, my cook," and address the envelope to Coqueline. Like all her United States tours, this was a series of triumphs. Critics were again loud in their hosannas, and that American Sappho, Ella Wheeler Wilcox, composed one of her most gushing poems, which was syndicated in every Hearst paper throughout the country. It was almost satisfactory. She returned with a barrow full of those gold coins. Okay, I'm going to say that back again. It was all most satisfactory, not almost satisfactory. It was all most satisfactory. Most satisfactory. She returned with a barrow full of those gold coins, and before she shoveled every one of them out the window in Paris, she went for her annual respite in Belle Isle. More and more with each passing year, Madame Sarah looked forward to her Belle Isle summers. The moment she stepped off the little ferry onto the island, she started with nostrils a-quiver like an excited horse breathing in lungs full of clean salt air, her head raised high, her green-blue eyes following the swooping movements of the planing gulls. Then when her rattling surrey rounded a bend of the rough road, and she caught sight of her fort rising on the rocky promontory and waving welcome from the top of a flagpole a white banner with its gold and blue device of an S.B. entwined above a gay quam meme. Her soul soared with the gulls, and she shed her eccentricities, her off-stage play-acting, and became as much of a happy, unaffected woman as it was possible for her ever to be. Suze Rueff, in her book I Knew Sarah Bernhardt, wrote, "The heroine of so many great first nights, who had impersonated countless characters and varied types of womanhood, here threw herself, heart and soul, into the role of hostess, mother, friend. She brought to these the same sure touch, the same perfection of technique, the same burning enthusiasm as to all her creations, and the result was something unique and unforgettable."